Okay, I'll call the Study Commission meeting of February 23rd, 2026 to order. Can we have roll call? I have Lori Casey, Cindy Perdue-Dolan, Ben Thielen, Matt Steppen, Dan Dennehy is excused for tonight, Chad Silk, Cindy Shaw, and Mary McCormick, and myself. So let's have our Pledge of Allegiance and prayer, please. Public comment on any item on the agenda. I don't see anybody here tonight. And no public comment on anything not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the Study Commission. So moving on, approval of the minutes held February 9th. Ms. Shaw?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did go over the minutes and they seem to be in order. So at this time, I would make a motion to approve the minutes from February 9th.
Is there a second? Ms. McCormick has seconded. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Correspondence and our Study Commission update. I received an email shortly before this meeting that was forwarded by Mr. Mattern of the Racetrack Volunteer Fire Department. So please look in your emails for that email. And then Ms. Adams, I have forwarded it to you as well to include in our meeting minutes. Okay, moving on to our unfinished business tonight. The item of import is the Fire Department's working group update, which includes option 1 and option 3 draft charter language. Mr. Enruth, do you want to walk us through the memo that you have provided us? Ms. Dolan, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before we go to the language discussion, can we talk generally about option 1 and 3? Because I've got a couple questions. Thank you.
So I think in the attorney's memo here, the county attorney's memo, he talks about option 1's possibilities, what will happen with it, and option 3's possibilities of what will happen with it. Do you think that will answer the question? Okay, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my question is, just to start things off, is last time we met, we were talking and we narrowed down to 2 options. So it should be option 1 and 2 on the agenda because now we just have 2 options. But my question for everyone here is, and I was posed this question last week and I thought it was a good one to ask. If option 1 was the volunteer question, and then we asked them to provide some information looking forward, and so they provided that document. For option 2, which is talking about basically the status quo, there was 2 questions. 1, do we need additional information from the career fire department in option 2 with what does the look ahead look like with regard to the volunteers going forward in that regard? And then the second question is, if in fact option 2 is status quo with what's in the charter currently, do we even need an option 2? Thanks.
Thanks, Ms. Dolan. I don't think that our second option, or we were calling them option 1 and option 3 because the working group had presented 1, 2, and 3. I don't think that is a status quo. I think there was a change. Maybe Mr. Steppen, you could help me out with that.
Thanks, Madam Chair. One specific change was the inclusion of a volunteer fire coordinator. So that was a change from the status quo. The other, I believe what we as a group decided was that the current language fed some of the ambiguity that did not allow for what may be the intent of the charter to happen. And so I believe the county attorney's job was to look at the current language and what revisions could be made to better hold up to challenge with respect to governance under a unified structure. Is that accurate?
County Attorney Enright?
Chairwoman Brandel, Councilman Seven, yeah, that's what this memo does. I thought the two options were, as I understood them, option number one was whichever way the council wants to label them as they appear in the memo. Option issue number one is expressly modifying the language that is currently in the charter to include the volunteer department underneath the BSB charter, but removing any ambiguity to the language and providing Butte-Silver with full authority to govern the volunteer department as allowed by statute. And then issue number two is removing the volunteers from the charter and what issues would correspond with that. That's how this memo reads.
That's my recollection as well. And then in the documents that the working group provided, I remember the statement affirmed the authority of the chief, the fire chief of Butte-Silver
Yes.
as one of the pieces that was in the second option or third
And that's
option.
what this memo does. This memo does not include the language with the volunteer chief coordinator, which can be added in anywhere, no matter what anybody wants to do, but it does talk about if the volunteers are removed, keeping the boards of trustees as advisors. That's in the second half of the memo.
So in our kind of process here, I'm thinking there's maybe a piece too. So tonight we can talk about moving these options forward for a preliminary report. And I agree that there's maybe some more discussion that needs to be had on what that looks like. You know, to your point, Ms. Dolan, like what does it look like? Are we going to change? We're going to, you know, would the career department restructure, or does it stay, you know, very similar? I think there is some discussion. We talked about that, and I'm looking through our notes here. We did talk about that last meeting too, and that we have some more evaluation to do. And we had agreed last meeting that that evaluation process, we didn't want to stall getting our report finished and getting it out. And as we go through the evaluation process, we go through public meetings, we go through the public hearing, it could be that we don't vote for either option. I don't know what, we got to vote for an option that moved forward on the ballot. But, you know, it could be that we change up a little bit about what that language or that ballot language might look like. We still have pieces to do with evaluation. Ms. Dolan?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that info. And that's why I called you today, Mutt. That was my question. So thank you for that info. But I will say that once we talk about this tonight and this memo from the county attorney, I would like this group to get a document from the career fire department folks with a look ahead. You know, if like you had asked the volunteers for option one to come up with a document that says, this is our look ahead, and I'd like that for option 2 or 3, however we're going to frame that now, the other option to get a document that says, this is how we're going to move forward with a discussion about, or bullets about how we're going to work with the volunteers in that, you know, it all comes down to fairness. I want to make sure we're being fair to everyone and mostly to the voters to have the best information moving forward. So I think that's imperative for us to get that look ahead from the chief or whoever is involved in doing that to get that for our benefit and for the benefit of the voter and for that look ahead to the listening sessions that we'll have moving forward. Thanks.
Ms. Shaw?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to go down to the basics here. This is the first I've seen this document, and I know Mr. Enrith, our county attorney, put a lot of work into it, but I haven't even read it yet. And then on top of that, I thought we were going to do maybe some ballot language tonight, and this is all about background, and I understand. I don't know how much of this would end up in a report, but it's all good stuff. But I'm just kind of curious where we're going to go from here, this moment, tonight.
So what I'd like to see is, I asked Mr. Enruth to start us off with the conversation, so, walking us through the memo, so he could talk us through the points that are in here. We can ask questions of what's in the memo. We can imagine what might happen. I don't think that we are ready for ballot language, so to speak, yet. We're not ready for ballot language on any of the issues that we're putting forward in the preliminary report at this point. We've been kind of, drafting, but that's going to be the next steps. We have to get forward to which issues we want to bring forward to the preliminary report, and then finish our public process before we're coming up with that. I mean, that language is going to be kind of concurrent, and that's kind of what we've talked about with Mr. Enruth, and making sure that we're having, two channels working at the same time. Ms. Shaw?
So as far as our timeline goes, I'm just curious how, after this evening, of course, we're going to have a lot of discussion, I'm sure, but this is all going to fit in to our timeline as far as getting the ballot language put together and then preliminary report.
We're running slower than we anticipated, and I think that's okay. We need to get the drop dead deadline is that we need to have the ballot language to the clerk and recorder around the end of May and early June to start getting that moving forward and making sure that if there's any problems, it comes back to us in time. But we do have a little bit of hurry up that we need to do, and a little bit of hard work ahead of us. That is for sure. Ms. Dolan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So to follow up from what Cindy said, thank you, Cindy, for that. Appreciate that. Because what's the timeline, exactly to Cindy's point? I mean, this is a big document that needs a lot of looking over and digesting. So what's the time frame for accepting this or discussing it? Will we be able to discuss this over the next few meetings? What does that look like?
This is the only item on tonight's agenda. So I'd hope that we could get through this memo discussion. And, last meeting, we had agreed to coming to this meeting ready to put forward what we're going to bring to the preliminary report.
So quick follow-up to that, but what about all this language with the survey questions? Are we going to discuss that tonight? Because this is another thing I tried to dissect today and read it with my very limited time that I had. So I made a few, highlights, but are we going to discuss this as well?
The survey is not on the agenda tonight. We needed to have time to look at it. I need to look at budget. We'll bring it back. It's not on the agenda for tonight's discussion.
Okay, I just don't know how we can talk about this when we haven't read it.
We're going to do that right now. If we could turn it over to Mr. Enruth to begin walking through the memo with us. I'm sure we can read while he walks through the memo with us. I understand that we need to have, some time to digest the content. I understand that, but we have him with us right now. He's here to answer our questions. I think we begin that process if we could, please. So, Mr. Enruth, can you kick us off?
Chairwoman Brandel, Council, I was tasked at the last meeting with drafting an in-depth memo with regards to options 1 and what previously was drafted as option 2. I do agree with Ms. Perdue-Olin that we should probably label them options 1 and 2. For those watching online tonight, the memo itself is specifically stated issue 1 and issue 2. Issue 1 is with regards to amending the current charter language, providing clearer language in the charter that would provide Butte-Silver County and a Director of Fire Services with full authority over the career firefighter department and volunteer firefighter department. The reason the memo was needed is because currently the charter has some specific language in it under section 7.03 that states that the existing volunteer fire departments are governed by applicable state law. However, there were certain administrative responsibilities assigned to city county officials. There was a Montana Attorney General opinion that also bolstered that stated that because the charter was not expressly clear on it and it deferred to state law, that the Board of Trustees retained their budgetary authority. They had control over their budgets, and BSB's primary role was simply, more coordination rather than government. So the task was to create language which created a stronger, clearer charter that would allow Butte-Silver County to have full authority over the career firefighters and the volunteer firefighters. There is applicable state law. Montana law specifically allows consolidated governments to assume the functions of local governmental units. I know that that's kind of hard to understand that way, but the volunteer fire departments are local governmental units. They have their own board of trustees, they have their own governing laws. However, the charters have to clearly provide for those transfers of powers. Our charter does not do that. When you have volunteer fire districts or rural fire districts, when they are created, they are political subdivisions. They're governed by trustees. They have their own budget preparation. They have levying authority. They have operational control. In order to make it clearer in the charter, you have to specifically transfer all of those authorities to the charter. So the legal analysis is, there is current weakness in the charter. That weakness is our statute, our charter specifically stating that the current volunteer fire departments are to be governed by state law, except for there's some other language in there that gave the Director of Fire Services some control over them as well. That's where all this ambiguity is. Not everything was transferred. So my recommended charter provision is as follows. Under section 7.03D, the charter needs to be amended, in my opinion, to state, if this is the proposal that is to be put forth, fire protection services within the city county are declared through this charter to be a unified governmental function of the consolidated government. All volunteer departments and rural fire districts located within the city county are hereby consolidated into and made part of the Butte-Silver Fire Department, excluding the areas within the towns of Walkerville and Melrose, Montana. The administration, operational control, and coordination of all fire protection services shall be exercised through the Butte-Silver Fire Department under the authority of the Director of Fire Services and the Council of Commissioners. All powers, duties, and responsibilities previously vested by Montana law in the boards of trustees or other governing bodies of such districts shall be extinguished and are now exercised by the Butte-Silver County Council of Commissioners unless otherwise provided by ordinance. Continued under section D, the operational authority clause is what I have it labeled as. It would not be labeled that way in the charter, but it would specifically state that the Director of Fire Services shall establish operational standards and training requirements, response protocols, and equipment policies applicable to all fire protection agencies operating within the city county to ensure consistent and effective public safety services. This includes the distribution, use, and transfer of all fire protection equipment, apparatus, and facilities in order to promote efficient fire protection services. Budget oversight. All volunteer fire departments and fire districts shall submit proposed annual budgets to the Director of Fire Service for review and recommendation. The Council of Commissioners shall have the authority to adopt, amend, and approve the budgets of all volunteer fire departments and fire protection districts within the city county. All revenues derived from taxes or other resources for fire protection shall be administered through the city-county budget process. Revenue raised for fire protection purposes within the city county may be administered through the financial system of the consolidated government in accordance with the adopted budgets and applicable law. In my research with regards to local governments, bringing in volunteer fire departments and volunteer districts, one thing that they did was any existing board of trustees of a fire district that were legally in place at that time, that were within the city county, shall serve as in an advisory capacity only, unless otherwise provided by ordinance. So in conclusion, the current charter language preserves the independence of volunteer districts, amending the charter to declare fire protection a unified governmental function and to place operational and budget oversight within the city-county structure would significantly strengthen the authority of Butte-Silver while also remaining consistent with Montana law. That's the problem with the charter right now, is it does not clearly state that all of those authorities and responsibilities were transferred to Butte-Silver County. In order to strengthen that, we need to be very clear that that is all transferred through the charter. Issue number 2, or option 2, was simply removing any mention of the volunteer fire departments from the Butte-Silver County Charter and replace it with just our unified fire service structure administered by ordinance.
Can I have a point of order? Oh, okay. Thank you. County Attorney, are you swapping the two?
I
Yeah, because this
apologize
is
for that.
all of that you just said is option 2, not option 1, so I'm just confused all the way through. So am I right? You have them reversed in this memo?
That is correct, and that's why I stated in the beginning before I started talking that the memo labeled them as issues 1 and 2 and they were flipped, so the people listening could understand that. I had them just marked in my notes as options 1 and 2, and that's how I just had them addressed. But yes, Commissioner Padu-Dolan, that is correct. Option 1 is strengthening the charter language. Option 2 in the memo, issue 2, is removing the volunteers from the charter.
Thank you.
Yes. Under section 7.3 of the charter, it currently establishes our fire department. It's got both paid and volunteer departments with provisions concerning, the organization, advisory committees, fire district governance, and coordination of services. So the prior Montana Attorney General opinion, which is the same opinion that's talked about in the first half of the memo, discusses how the Butte charter still allows the volunteers to have budgetary authority, and it defers to state law for their governance. So if the council wished to remove the volunteer departments from the charter structure, centralized fire services, you have to amend the charter. We all understand this. Under Montana law, we can amend this charter. There's just some basic things in there so the memo flowed correctly, even though we all know that we're here to amend the charter. If the amendment repeals the current section 7.03 that references the volunteer department, it does need to be replaced with some kind of fire service structure. Simply removing, this is what my research has kind of led me to, is simply removing them, just removing their language could create a lot of chaos. Because removing the volunteers from our charter, it does not dissolve their districts. As we've all discussed multiple times, they are still legally there by Montana law. The only way you can dissolve a rural fire department or volunteer fire department is by incorporating them into the county, or through several other options that the voters have where they can file a petition and things like that. So we can't just simply remove them from the charter without putting in place some protections. We need to do this so we can, avoid operational disruptions, staffing, equipment, service delivery, things of that nature. The legal risks with regards to removing the volunteers from the charter and transitioning to a new fire protection structure are in the second half of this, or in the back end of this memo. The biggest issues that I think Butte-Silver County would face is the current overlapping districts. We have our new fire protection district that was established through Butte-Silver County ordinance. It's the taxing district. And then we have the fire districts that would remain in place if the volunteers were removed from the charter, their original districts. So those significant legal risks involve overlapping taxing authority, conflicting operational command, potential gaps in fire protection services, liability exposure if service becomes inadequate, and litigation from existing fire districts. These risks, in my opinion, are heightened by the fact that half of these districts are located within Butte-Silver, the city of Butte-Silver, even though we're a city we're city county. They're within, this, not city limits, but within the city itself. Under Montana law, rural fire districts, they're independent political subdivisions, as I previously stated. They have their own laws. They can levy taxes. They can manage their own equipment. They can employ or appoint firefighters, and they have directing operations within their district. So if the charter removes the volunteer departments, but the districts remain legally intact, BSB could be faced with multiple issues, such as the BSB Fire Department being responsible for a service in an area and a stationary fire district still existing in that same area. So this is the ones that we're talking about where they're included in town. It creates dual authority over a fire protection district. Based on that research, courts generally disfavor the overlapping governments, creating the same function without the clear statutory hierarchy of those functions. As we've talked about, one of the issues is double taxation. While I have stated, and I still stand by, that it is legally permissible for both of these entities to operate and function in the same districts, a court still may be asked to examine whether or not the taxation serves a duplicative purpose. I mean, that will be up to taxpayers if they're paying a double tax. Operational control. The most immediate legal conflict would be who is actually in charge at a fire scene. If we don't have memorandums of, the service memorandums in place and things like that, who's actually in control at a fire scene within one of the districts that is still, the volunteer districts? Are the district firefighters, responding independently? Are the BSB career firefighters asserting jurisdiction? Are there conflicting command structures? There could be, ambiguity with mutual aid, insurance coverage, liability decisions that could be made during an emergency response. If command authority is unclear, both entities could face liability exposure. Service coverage concerns. Another major issue would be if the volunteers were removed from the charter, and they assumed full responsibility for their districts. If they went and they filed, a legal action to assume full taxing authority within that district, and a court, ruled in their favor and said, yes, you have full taxing authority. Butte-Silver County can't tax you for that same district. We could have a lapse in services. But the problem with, the volunteer groups is, volunteers operate with limited staffing, limited daytime availability, aging volunteer basis. So if BSB is required to withdraw services from an area due to a taxation issue, there may be inadequate staff for operations under the volunteers departments. This increases response times, inability to meet fire insurance standards, increased property loss, and possible personal injury claims. The urban districts located within the city, it's a particular risk to the Butte-Silver County, is that several of the fire districts that were historically created for rural fire protection are now located within the developed, parts of town. So if BSB is required to withdraw services from a district because a legally intact volunteer department is left in place and giving full taxing authority by a court, you could have urban neighborhoods served by small volunteer departments, inconsistent training and equipment standards, and fragmented emergency responses because you have multiple volunteer fire departments throughout the city. That can raise public safety concerns and legal exposure. It is, when we start looking at liability exposure from a municipal standpoint, that includes negligence claims, failure to provide services on BSB's part. It could create litigation between the district trustees and Butte-Silver to determine who is, going to be providing fire services within the developed parts of the city, out into the rural areas. This could also have effect on insurance ratings, municipal insurance premiums, property insurance costs. Having service fragmentation, lowers that ISO rating, where if you have one service servicing an area, that gives you a higher ISO rating. When we're talking about governance and command uncertainty, without the careful restructuring, and this is what I was talking about, if it were the decision of the council to remove the volunteers from the charter and give them back their full authorities, I think there also needs to be put in place, what their taxing authority is, who's controlling what equipment, what volunteer control personnel is going to be available at all times in these districts. How are they going to relate with Butte-Silver County, the city? Is the city retaining legal responsibility for public safety within that area? What are those memos going to look like? And I believe that that's where Ms. Perdue-Dolan had, Councilwoman Perdue-Dolan had them draft that memo for us, which was their game plan for this issue. You have a worst case scenario, is the charter removes the volunteers, cities reduce services, districts continue to levy taxes, but you're lacking staffing. You have a major fire that occurs, litigation, alleges that the restructuring reduced fire protection. The key legal reality of moving the volunteers from the charter is it doesn't eliminate the fire districts themselves. There's still a fire district from Butte-Silver County that is in place, and there are their fire districts that are put in place, and there are multiple volunteer districts, all governed by their own boards, own bodies, and they have their own sets of rules. That would be the root of any potential conflicts of basically all of those different governing bodies. So the conclusion in the memo is that while removing the volunteer departments from the charter, may simplify governance on a paper standpoint, doing so without addressing the continued existence and authority of the fire district creates substantial legal and operational conflicts within Butte-Silver. Careful coordination with statutory district structures will be essential to avoid overlapping authority, taxation disputes, and potential reductions in fire protection services.
Okay, I realize that is very fast.
Yes.
And it's also a lot of information. So first blush questions to Mr. Enruth, please. Ms. Dolan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess before we even get into the specifics of this document, I'd really like an opportunity to have this document be apples to apples with regard to your subject lines. You have subject lines in option 2, you have just a few, but in option 1, you go through coverage concerns, operational control, potential consequences, worst case scenarios. It's all very, very negative. Understandably, there are a lot of questions, but with option 2, there's no discussion of those subtopics. And so I would really like an opportunity for you to do that. You know, if you have nothing to add on if there's worst case scenarios and there aren't any, just say there aren't any, but it really needs to be, again, back to fairness. This document, from what was just read, has very limited information. If you kind of balance it, it's very heavy in the option 1 discussion with removal of the volunteers from the charter, and that might necessarily be so. I mean, you have a lot of good information, but that said, status quo, basically, and just adding a volunteer fire coordinator, there are a lot of potential negatives for that. One being, what happens to the volunteer departments if they don't go along with what transpires? I just would like and hope that a document like this would have a more balanced approach to it, if you understand what I'm saying. Thanks.
It's not what I was tasked with doing, Commissioner Dolan. I was tasked with asking these 2 questions. If you're asking me to provide balance on if I think one is better than the other, that's not my job. That's this council's job to look at, what is presented to them. The questions were, how do we fix the charter language, which was answered, and the question was, if we remove the volunteers, what happens? If you want to talk about the possibilities with correcting the charter language, and if the volunteers don't like that, as we've previously discussed before, that could lead to litigation. They may say, we don't agree with the charter being able to do that. I highly disagree with that. State law is absolutely clear that this county has the ability, per its charter, to bring in these other governmental entities. Now, may there be litigation over who owns what and how those resources were brought to be? Yes, that could ensue. That has already been, pretty much ruled on by the City of Glasgow case, but that can be added in here if we'd like. But if you would like me to give I can add to the first option, and I will correctly label them how this council wants them as the options on the ballot, rather than issues. What possibility, what possible bad outcomes could happen from strengthening the charter language, such as what you just said, that the volunteers could leave. They may not stay. They may not want, the current volunteers may not want to operate under that type of an existing format. Or that there could be volunteer departments that sue to try and stay independent. Again, those could lead to litigation. I believe that based off of the case law and the statutes, that when a charter is clear, consolidating all of them into one is legal. It's not overly complicated. It does cause issues within the departments themselves, but I can do that. I can balance this on that one option with possible pros and cons of that, if that's what this council would like, and I can do that fairly quickly. This is still down on my computer, obviously, but I can add that. That's not a problem.
Mr. Enruth, I think that would be appreciated for sure. Other questions? Mr. Silk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. County Attorney Enruth, this is the first time I saw this when I came in here, and I feel like there's some sort of tension created that there was going to be something moved without this body's recommendation. We've been pushing off the preliminary report for a long time. The preliminary report is just to get something out there to the public to start the conversation. This isn't ending the conversation. And I really appreciate the work that you put into it and going it through this with us, so then we can digest it from here on out. So I really do appreciate that. I don't know what this tension is that I'm feeling, and maybe if I'm the only one feeling it, then so be it. I want to get the boogeyman out of the closet. What happens if the volunteers don't like something that the Director of Fire Services does by eliminating fire department, a volunteer fire department? The letter that we received today also had what we saw during House Bill 547 of a scare tactic of everyone's insurance premiums going up. Now, let's just be clear that the Director of Fire Services cannot get rid of volunteer fire departments by themselves. It says right in the charter. We should know this by now. It needs 2/3 vote of any ordinance change. Even moving a chainsaw needs 2/3 vote of the Council of Commissioners. It says right in here. I'm going to read it for everybody, especially people who are listening or people who are going to listen to us later. Any ordinance changing boundaries of existing fire districts or reallocating firefighting equipment shall require an affirmative vote by 2/3 of the whole number of Council of Commissioners. There is not this dictatorship that happens. This is the executive side of the branch working, running and following ordinances set by the legislative branch. No one can go do whatever they want. That's been a scare tactic this whole time, and I thought we would get past that by now. That is why running through ordinance, like every other department does, is effective, because you can change it. What happens if this, what happens with that? No, yeah, we could do that all day. But if it's run through ordinance, then let's have some faith in it, because that's how the rest of our county's governed. I really appreciate everything that you did in this, Matt, or County Attorney Ann Ruth, and Madam Chair, about just even asking for this. And that's what I want to say, and I'm sure I'll have more to say after this. And I do have some things to say that I may wait until after digesting this further. So thank you.
Mr. Enruth.
And just to make something clear, and I think this goes to Councilwoman Perdue-Dolan's request, is state law is also clear. Even if a charter assumes volunteer districts, you still cannot dissolve them unless you go through the state law. So the charter can take control of the volunteer districts and how they're managed, budgetary-wise and operational-wise. But unless the charter specifically states that the volunteer districts are dissolved themselves, the Director of Fire Services cannot just dissolve a volunteer district. That has to be done in accordance with state law.
Ms. Casey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two questions for County Attorney. One, in the first, and I'm going to just remain with your titles. In the first issue,
Yep.
if they come under the operation and budgetary control of the Director of Fire Services, if they don't want to be a volunteer department, can they dissolve themselves? Can their Board of Trustees choose to dissolve their entity?
Sorry, I'm waiting for my cue.
Yeah, sorry.
And, Chairman Brandel, Commissioners, the way I read the Board of Law is the trustees have the ability to combine, to govern, and to do all of those things. However, the way I read it, in order to dissolve, it actually has to be the individuals that live in the district. You need a petition with 40% of the people to do so. Now, there are also the inherent issues of, if you don't have a Board of Trustees, how do they function? So if the volunteer districts are brought into the charter themselves, and then the Director of Fire Services, and to be clear, it's the Council of Commissioners that will have budgetary authority. Those districts are still intact. They're just not governed by the Board of Trustees anymore. They are governed by the Director of Fire Services, and budgetary-wise by the Council of Commissioners. So that's why when you'll read in here, if that was the option that was presented. One of the things that, I had read and that I thought was a good idea was keeping the Board of Trustees in there and in place as advisory only unless otherwise dictated by ordinance, which then gives the Council of Commissioners the authority to give them more authority if they want to.
I guess it's not a follow-up, but one more question on issue number 2. If we were to remove the volunteers, there are a lot of issues that you brought to light, some of which I hadn't thought of, so I really appreciate that. My question would be, could the majority of them, in your opinion, could they be resolved through like memorandum of agreements or things like that? It seems like something would have to be in place to not just have chaos if they were taken out, but could some of those issues or a lot of them be resolved through that type of agreements, in your opinion?
Those types of agreements could be used to resolve those issues, yes. It's just depending on whether or not you could get the two groups discussing it to come to put a memorandum in place.
Mr. Thielen, and then I'll take you, Ms. McCormick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. County Attorney Enruth, I have a question here. And it seems to me over the last year, listening to all this, a lot of it seems to evolve and revolve around one person, right? Changing the charter language and taking that title away from one individual and just making him the chief instead of the director, instead of making him and having him as both, would that help anything? I mean, it's still going to be the same person. He's still going to be in charge, but I just have a problem because with the director of fire services and the chief being the same person, because I'm sure Commissioner Silk doesn't address him as, hey, good afternoon, director, how are you? I'm sure it's good afternoon, chief. That's how I would do it, right? So can the change in the charter language clear up some of this mess?
Mr. Enruth.
Chairwoman Brandel, Commissioners, I think that's an interpersonal question that I can't answer. I mean, legally speaking, we have directors that also have other titles here in the county as well. I think that's just having an issue with your boss, and sometimes people don't like their bosses. I mean, that happens all the time. Legally speaking, I don't know if that would change anything or not.
Language in the charter would help this situation, or
That would probably be more of a question for the parties involved, rather than legally. I'm allowed to, and I will continue to, give just the simple legal advice, the advice with regards to how these two entities can operate within themselves. I'm not a party to that. I just simply can only provide this council with these are the legal options that you have, and that these are the consequences of one, pros and cons of one and pros and cons of the other.
well, thank you for doing this. It was very helpful.
Ms. McCormick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, County Attorney. And yeah, I mean, I really appreciate what you've done here. You've brought a lot of things to light. But I think, removing the volunteers from the charter does not dissolve any of the districts by any means. And I believe that the volunteers have put a lot of thought into this already, and the work that's gonna entail to make a fully functional system. Certainly the outline that they provided us on what they see the next steps if they were removed from the charter addresses some of the concerns by, developing memorandum of agreements. It's going to take a lot of work on both parts if this was to happen, both the county and the volunteer departments. But one thing I do think you said that they talk about in that chart, or what their plan for the future is to ultimately have one volunteer department. That I don't want for us to continue something that they're going to be all these independent departments out there operating on their own. I think their ultimate goal is to be one volunteer fire department with different stations.
Ms. Dolan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chad, I think you were spot on with what you said just earlier. I don't believe there's tension, only questions. And I think what could really help answer some of the questions, because you were talking about things that happen afterwards, and I think, when you were talking about ordinances and moving forward, and this document really helps, and thank you, County Attorney. I don't think we want to ask your opinion on things other than legalities, but to have that future document like we asked the volunteers to do, I think that would answer a lot of questions for folks out in Butte-Silver Bow who have questions about these options and some of the questions that I've gotten. So I think because we asked the volunteers to do that and they came up with a document of future look out from the ballot in 2026, that would be really helpful if the chief and the director of fire services right now could put together a document to say, if option 2 goes forward, this is what we think needs to happen, with the bullet points or a paragraph or two, to alleviate those or to answer those questions or concerns, for that look ahead, to say, this is what's going to happen, and we'll go to the Council of Commissioners, we'll do something by ordinance, or just have some information that we can work off of and not just say status quo, because a lot of folks don't know what that even means. So that would be beneficial. Do you think that's something that we could get before we start the second round of things for the study commission? Because I think that would be very helpful, and to your point, it would answer a lot of questions and alleviate some of that tension, I believe, anyway.
Ms. Casey?
Madam Chair, I think, I don't mean to be disrespectful to Commissioner Dolan, but I don't think we should be asking Commissioner Selk for that information. I think if this group wants it, the request needs to come from you, Madam Chair, to the Director of Fire Services, just as a point of order, because I think the working group was working with the volunteers and had a relationship. We asked that, or the working group could ask the Director of Fire Services. But I think putting Commissioner Selk in the middle of this at times is not quite fair to do. I think either through the chair or through the working group should go back to the Director of Fire Services, explain what kind of information we want to show. I don't disagree that would be good. I'm disagreeing with the process of putting Commissioner Selk in the middle of it. He also still is a study commission member.
Thank you, Ms. Casey. Mr. Steppen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As that member of the committee who has probably had that more direct communication with the career, I'd be happy to communicate that to the chief and work on what that would look like.
Ms. Dolan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Lori. Appreciate that. Sorry, Chad, didn't mean to put you in the middle. I just know that you've been very forthcoming with information, and I appreciate that very much. But thank you, Matt, because I think it's something that could really help move the conversation forward. So thank you. And sorry, I didn't mean to put you in the middle, but I know you've been very forthcoming to help move those conversations forward. So thank you, Matt, for going forward with the working group, because I think it is important.
So I want to kind of circle back to this in terms of what we're asking Mr. Steppen to request of the fire chief, for sure, so that we have a good direction. And I also want to clarify that this option, whatever number it is, option B, option A, I don't know, sorry, just being smarmy now. This isn't a status quo. It is changing language that would affirm the authority of Butte-Silver Bow Fire Central Districts, whatever we call it, fire services. And then it doesn't remove volunteer fire departments from the charter, but it does, it doesn't remove their existence, but it does put their trustees in an advisory capacity as proposed by Mr. Enruth, if we should adopt that. So in terms of language that, or the questions that we should be asking the fire chief. What is some of the stuff we need to hear? Ms. McCormick?
Excuse me, thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to know what the authority and duties of the volunteer coordinator would be specifically. I'd also like to know, in here when we talk about budget oversight, it said the volunteer districts and fire districts shall submit proposed annual budgets to the Director of Fire Services for review and recommendation. And then the Council of Commissioners shall have the authority to adopt, amend, or approve the budgets of all volunteers. So what I want to know is if a volunteer fire department makes a budget and it goes to the chief for review and recommendation, what gets forwarded to the Council of Commissioners? Is it the budget request that the volunteers, if there's a disagreement between the volunteers, what they want and what the fire department, the Director of Fire Services wants, what gets forwarded to? Does that make any sense?
Mr. Enruth?
Just point of clarification, with regards to budgets in this county, the directors or department heads, first, we make our budget requests with the chief executive. And then the chief executive is the one that actually makes the final determination on what we do or do not get. And then if we wish to object as a department head, we can bring it to the council. The way the current fire department budgeting is operating is how it is stated in here is through ordinance, the volunteers were required to provide the director with their request for budgets, which then he would bring to the CEO, and it's the chief executive's determination on whether or not they get them. So that's how that process works. The final authority is always with the council, just so everybody's clear on how budget works.
Ms. Casey?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think maybe to Mary's point, what I would like to see is if the Director of Fire Services would be willing to go to through the budget director in the process of creating individual budgets so that their stuff is not all lumped into, like, for equipment, one line item budget that's with the paid and the volunteer all put together, that it may be easier and maybe more transparent for the volunteers if each volunteer, I know it's another 9 budget pages in the books, but if they each had their own specific budget that outlined, like, here's what's paid in works comp, here's what you're going to have for equipment, utilities for your building, gas, that kind of thing, and then you would see, the public would also see which volunteers are using what money, which ones aren't maybe responding to calls or needing so much budgetary. I think, to me, and as a taxpayer and looking at the budgets, I think that would help clarify something to that. I know it can be done.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. Sorry, I was all excited there for a minute. That can be done, and I know that can be done because we do it in my office. I have my overall budget, and then Senior Deputy County Attorney Mike Clegg has a budget for Veterans Court and DUI Court, which is completely separate from my overall budget. And then our victim advocate, Darla McCarthy, has her own budget for the victim advocate services. And all that money is completely separate from my initial overall budget. So that can be done. I don't want to put something on Director Hassler. It happens in my office, that's all I'm saying.
Mr. Steppen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think one general question that can be asked, I think that what we've asked the volunteers to provide is what would provide us some, I don't want to say assurance or confidence, but if what we've asked of them is if you were to be removed, show us what steps would happen in order to try and help maintain efficient services. So I think that would be a fair question to say, if, I'm going to call it issue 1, option 2,
Let's actually,
right?
may I make a point of order? Let's clarify those right now. And I believe Ms. Prudolin had them correctly. Option 1 is removing the volunteers, and option 2 is modifying the charter language. And I will correct that in the memo addendum.
So I think that the question can be, if option 2 is what's ultimately voted on by the community, what's different about how the fire services will operate based on that change? I think that's a very fair question to ask. I think with respect, I don't want to speak for Director Osborne, but I think one of the challenges with respect to the budget question is right now those requests aren't all being received, and he can't compel them to make them. And so what he shared with our working group when we went to lunch were the copies of the most recent budget requests, and it line itemed volunteer and career items. And so I think that, my first reaction is, if he's in charge, he should bring forward whatever he thinks is best for the fire services. But I think the process does require them line item by line item, and by affirming that authority, I hate to use the word compel when you're dealing with volunteers, but he can compel that from each department, or at least have a little bit more teeth in making that request.
Ms. Dolan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So another question I have is, in option 2, and changing that language, making the Board of Trustees and the volunteer departments advisors, I'm wondering, I'm kind of worried only because of the dysfunction of the Fire Advisory Board, which is also an advisory situation that has not worked. And for whatever reason, multitude of reasons, and that's, again, not our purview, but to put that in there in addition to something that's already not working and totally dysfunctional and blown up a million times. When I was a commissioner, I saw that. I see Mr. Sorich in our audience. He was on there. But it's concerning only because I'd hope we can come to some idea of, again, maybe that's something we can ask the chief to include in a document of look ahead, what he envisions if the Board of Trustees were to become advisors, what that would look like. And, we don't, again, the millionth meeting, I've said this to Mr. Silk's point, we want to set everyone up for success, and we don't want to put barriers, and that might be a potential barrier, it might not be, but I just wanted to ask that question. Thanks.
I don't know whose hand was up first. Mr. Steppen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that one thing that's important, at least from my point of view on this, and I invite others to share theirs, but there is a conflict in the current language. And so what we're looking to do is remove the conflict. And we're presenting two very different ways to remove the conflict. And so I think words like advisory are important to make sure that we don't invite ambiguity, right? And so I see that as a clear statement that it's advisory and not authoritative, if that makes any kind of sense. So I think words matter, and I think what you're speaking to is how, personality dispute, as opposed to, and I'm talking about language that removes legal ambiguity, if that makes sense.
Mr. Thielen, and then I'll take you, Ms. Dolan.
Madam Chair, Council, one thing that I've been hearing from people that have been contacting me, if we remove the volunteers completely from the charter, as it were, and they have their own taxing authority, the people of the community are more stressed going to be more stressed financially, having to pay more taxes to support their local volunteer station. And that, in my mind, I just can't vote for something that's going to put a hardship on the members of the community. It's an aging community as it is. Some people are already taxed to the limit and they don't want any more taxes. So I'm conveying their thoughts on what they want to do with that, and they just don't want to pay more taxes by having to pay for their own fire services.
Thank you, Mr. Thielen. Ms. Dolan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to respond to Mr. Steppin's comment. Yes, the goal is to lessen that ambiguity and things that we can do structurally, but my concern is with the question about advisory roles, and the centralization of power. Well, that might be the goal to have for option 2, and the argument is for a better run situation. That may well be, however, that's what this whole 50-year fight has been about. It's been about power, control, and money. And so whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not casting that at all. I'm just saying what it was and is. So while it may be taking ambiguity away, will be very contentious. So I'm hoping that we can clarify that, and maybe with the chief's document to have that clarification with regard to advisory roles and how he will use that advisory. That will be very helpful, because that will help the taxpayers of Butte understand this particular issue.
Other thoughts or questions? So I like the framing that Mr. Steppen had given us here, that there's two very different options in front of us that we could possibly bring to the voters to affirm or deny. And I do think I agree with everything that's been stated, that there's just more evaluation that we need to do in regards to fleshing out the information for our voters so that they can have full information as they go to the polls. So if you take option 1 and remove the volunteers from the charter, it could lead to these consequences or these, pros. If you take option 2 and you consolidate everybody under the current existing chief and make the trustees advisory, it could have these consequences and these pros. So I think that's the direction we need to be at, to go out to the public. So Mr. Steppen, thank you for volunteering to get that work done. I guess the question of the hour is, with our decisions tonight, how do we want to proceed? Do you want to chew on it? I'm okay, because our timeline has been blown out of the water for months. If you want to chew on it and come back, we can. If you'd like to decide to move both of these to the report, we can take those motions and make that vote. Mr. Thielen.
Madam Chair, thank you. I myself would like to wait until we hear from Mr. Steppen and see what he gets from Chief Osborne, and then make our decision.
Ms. Casey?
Madam Chair, I'm going to be the disagreeer here, and I would like to see both options go forward, because I think in the end it is going to be up to the public, and how we choose to word that. I think the public should have a right to maybe go forward, at least in the preliminary report, on both options with the pros and cons listed out in that report. I think it's important. And the other thing I'd like to say is I think it's a disservice to say that your taxes are going to go up, because we all look at the bottom line of our taxes. Sometimes they go up and sometimes they go down. What the correct verbiage is they would be going out, they would be a special mill in their district. It could be that they only need the money that maybe would be coming off. We've heard that currently the Butte-Silver budget allows $250,000 approximately, or some, given towards the volunteers. I don't know if that includes work comp or that, but that doesn't mean that that 250,000 is now just going to go to the careers to spend. That would not be very budgetary conscious of the chief executive or the council of commissioners. So it may be that the mills even out. But I think the correct term is they would have to go out and do a special mill levy. It's no different than what the school mill levy does. They go out, they say it's going to raise your taxes $5 on a $100,000 property. They do the analysis, and they got to convince the voters in the end if they want to do it. So just to say it's going to be raise your taxes, I think, is a misnomer. And maybe that's the tax side of me coming out, but I can tell you taxes go up and down versus all sorts of things. What's different than what it was when we were a county is that we now all pay the emergency services mill, and you're still going to have that mill. It may not be the same, but you're still going to have that.
Thank you, Ms. Casey. I think, was it Ms. McCormick first?
Well, I agree 100% with Lori. I would have certainly like to have things more fleshed out for our preliminary report, but I think we have enough basic information to move both of these options forward and you know, give a little outline in the preliminary report about what they're proposing to do. You know, there's going to be more flesh and bones added or taken away when the charter document is actually, the amendment is actually prepared. But I think we are ready to move this forward, and I think we should move it forward. And I do appreciate your talk on the, you know, the implications of tax. I think there's other implications. There's unforeseen consequences. You know, I'm not going to be popular for saying this, but I think the note we got from the volunteers that the communication that we received is, you know, and what I've heard from some volunteers is if the situation doesn't get better for them, that we're not gonna have so many volunteers, and we may be losing volunteer departments. And then what are we gonna have to do then? We're gonna have to increase our paid force. And I love the paid fire department. I'm not against the paid fire department, but it's very expensive. Volunteers do save us money.
Okay, I'll go Mr. Soak, Ms. I think his finger was up too. I'm going to go with Mr. Soak, and then I'll come to you, Ms. Dolan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple things. I think all of us need to look into the MCA Title 7, Chapter 33, Part 21, and that lists all of the rural fire district laws. A lot of the questions that you have for County Attorney Ann Ruth can be answered by reading that, and it should help quite a bit. Dissolution of fire districts, volunteer rural fire departments that are affected by city-county consolidation, and unless specifically stated in charter, and that's how we can run our fire department. A lot of things that I've been hearing about budgetary meetings with volunteer chiefs and the director, that is great for ordinance, and that's why it's in there. The system was put in place to succeed. There's some people who just disagree with the vote that happened in 1996. So I think that going back to Title 7, Chapter 33, Part 21 will answer a lot of our questions. One of the things that Lori just mentioned with the taxes, we need to take a deep dive into that. $250,000 might be obtainable for volunteer departments if their districts, they have to vote for it individually, right? They're separate political subdivisions. So right now, each district would have to vote to increase their taxes. My fear is if that money is taken from their career department and you don't have paramedics to go on choking babies or mangled. Cindy, this is the world I live in. You have not held a dead baby in your hands and done CPR. As a mother and father have been yelling at you. You have not held C-spine.
Point of order.
That's fine, Madam Chair. I'm not even going to put you in that position. I'm going to go back. But when you laugh about things like that, That really, I hope people understand where you're coming from.
Point of order,
When we talk about
please.
when we talk about max exodus of volunteers because they don't like the direction of where the department's going, I have faith in the volunteers that are doing it for the right reasons to support their community, and that's why they volunteer.
Ms. Dolan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, my husband is a funeral director. So I do not appreciate that comment, not in our purview, and I understand the sacrifices of firefighters. It's crazy. But I think, please, my goodness, we can all be professional. And what I would like to say to Lori's point is I agree that we should move option 1 and 2 forward. However, if you go back a couple meetings, Mr. Dennehy did state that he was not comfortable moving options forward unless we had proper information. And without the proper information from the chief to substantiate option 2 would be a disservice to both options. I would like more information before we vote to move it to the preliminary report, because I think, again, for about the third time tonight, fairness. We need to make sure this particular issue, we come at it in a fair way. And I think if we've asked option 1 folks to give us more information so we can make an educated vote, then we are required to have option 2, additional information with Mr. Steppen has agreed to have that move forward as well before we take a vote. Thank you.
Mr. Thielen.
Well, I'm going to echo that. I asked for it previously, and I'm going to ask for it again, that this vote be held up until we have the information that Mr. Steppen gets from Chief Osborne.
Ms. Shaw.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for everybody's comments. I mean, we are tasked to do the best job we can do. We were all elected by the community. But I have to say that every time we get something like this, which is amazing, it brings up another bunch of questions. And I really think that what we have here is a good basis for moving this forward. I'm sorry that there might be disagreements to that, but we need to, I believe we can do in our report, we can have enough pros and cons in there to really establish some good information to the public. And let them know that, there might be legal issues, but, we're letting the public decide. And this is not the final thing, this is just the start. And we need to, I always say the drop dead date. I understand that's just my background from, trying to get things to a point. But I do think that we do have enough, in my opinion, enough to go forward. I'm not trying to disrespect anybody's comments or to throw something out to the public that they won't understand. That's not what I'm talking about. But I would have to say that it's time to start going towards our preliminary report. Thank you.
Other discussion? Okay, so I will call for the question, please, if there is a motion to move these issues forward to the preliminary report.
Madam Chair, I would make the motion that we move both option 1 and option 2 forward to the preliminary report.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
So I have the motion from Ms. Casey and the second from Ms. Shaw. Discussion on the motion. Ms. Dolan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can we have a date then? Can we give the Chief of Fire Services a deadline to have further documentation so we have it on the record that we are going to get more information and it's not left hanging before a vote?
Absolutely. And I think looking at our meeting minutes, this is something that may have slipped through our cracks, but I think it's absolutely reasonable to give 2 weeks to get that to us. We are planning to meet next week. And then I would say if he could get it to us by next week, that would be incredible. But by March 9th, is that reasonable, Ms. Dolan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It'd be better if it was within a week for our next meeting because we know we're under tight deadlines and things like that. So, yeah. I don't know.
Madam Chair, do you want me to amend my motion?
Yes, please.
I would make an amended motion that we move options 1 and 2 to the preliminary report with the request that the study commission ask the Director of Fire Services for his plan of what it would look like if option number 2 went forward. And we would like that within the next week if possible, but by the March 9th meeting.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion on the amended motion? Okay, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed? Okay, so we have Ms. Dolan as a nay. All right, folks, I appreciate the discussion. I appreciate working through the hard issues for sure. This is definitely a lot, and we're doing our work, and I think we can, you know, like Ms. McCormick very eloquently said, put this forward in the report and then keep working on what the pros and cons need to be. Ms. Dolan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Thielen did not vote. I think he needs to vote either yay, nay, or abstain. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so he is going to abstain. County Attorney Ann Ruth.
Do we have a book?
As someone that ran commission meetings by Robert Rule of Orders, whether I liked it or not, I had to vote. You could not abstain, you had to vote.
I would echo that because I thought the only time you could not vote is if you have a conflict of interest. And a conflict of interest has to be defined as a monetary interest.
That is correct. I do believe that those are the voting rules. I was just going to say that the only time I've ever seen anybody be able to abstain from voting is if there was a conflict of interest. One moment. Here we go.
While he's looking that up, explain to me the two options one more time, or
So,
what the motion is.
so the motion is to move both options to our preliminary report. So we're not affirming one or the other for going to the ballot. We're just moving them to our preliminary report. Our goal in the preliminary report is to have as much information as possible describing the pros and cons of each option for the voters. And then when we go through public comment and we go through our public hearing, there would be our vote at that time about if we're moving them to
So are
ballot.
you talking about moving them forward without Chief Osborne's information?
No, we wouldn't be writing the report until we have Chief Osborne's information. It's rather to include them in the report at this point.
Okay. What'd you come up with, Matt?
Give me 2 seconds here.
Okay.
Co-counsel is looking for me too. I pay all kinds of money for this thing, so we're going to use it. Where is voting? Motion to adjourn. Right to adjourn. Points of order.
Madam Chair, so I'll save County Attorney Enruth a little bit of time here. I can't vote for that until we have that information. So if that's the case, I'm going to vote no.
Okay. So then I'll re-record the vote if I could, please. So if you are voting aye, please signify by aye. So I have 1, 2. Mr. Silk, are you voting aye? 3, 4, 5, 6 of us going forward, and then 2 of us with no votes. Okay, all right, thank you. So we've got that recorded as a 6-2 vote. Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Thielen. All right, moving forward, we don't have any new business tonight and no public hearing. We are scheduled for Party Line on Wednesday. So, okay, Mr. Thielen, are you wanting to volunteer for Party Line? Okay, is there somebody else that would like to go with Mr. Thielen? Ms. Dolan? Okay. All right, our next commission meeting will be March 2nd here at the council chambers at 5 o'clock. And Mr. Steppen, I hope that you can spur that conversation along for us. Mr. Enruth.
According to co-counsel, and I had to pull it up in here too, it's equated if a council member or legislative member does not vote, it has been equated to them also being absent. It's recorded that they did not vote, and the yea or nay does not count. So it is possible, yes, you can simply choose not to vote. It's just, it's similar to being absent.
Thank you for taking the courage to vote, though, Mr. Thielen. And with that, do you want to make a motion? Oh, yes, absolutely, Ms. Dolan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to be prepared for our next meeting or the meeting after, when are we going to talk about this document for the survey? Thank you.
I absolutely think that needs to be on the agenda for next week.
Okay.
And then also next week, I'd like us to discuss our plan for public outreach and then set that timeline before the public hearing, giving us as much time as we need to get our report done because, as we've started the draft, I think it's going to be a lot bigger chore than we had anticipated, and I want to have a lot more discussion in our meetings about the report itself and what needs to be included and if there's more information we need to find out. So probably we need to work backwards from public hearing date to that. Yeah. Other questions before I ask Mr. Thielen for his adjournment motion? Okay, Mr. Thielen.
Madam Chair, I would like to make a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Is there a second? I have a second from Silk. Anybody opposed? All right, thank you all. We'll see you next week.